we would need to identify what are the scope, what is in scope, what is out of scope. We also need to work alongside different stakeholders, not just one or two, but we need to work with the project sponsor, the business sponsor. We need to work with the developers. We need to work with testers, the project managers, users. We need to work with the quality department. We need to work with architects to come up with the solution architecture. So as a business analyst, we've got these various set of interactions and touch points with several other stakeholders, and how we try and manage and ensure that each of their goals and each of their expectations are met is a challenge that we have in front of us as BAs. So I think that's where we need to, when we try and discuss the requirements, the vision, the scope, the roadmap with the sponsors, we work with the developers in terms of the functionality, the non-functional requirements, user stories, backlog. Again, the same with the testers and the architects, and then we work with the project manager in terms of defining what is in scope. And in the agile context, this is the interactions with the product owner, where we define the scope, where we come up with the backlog prioritization. We then identify a set of user stories. We work on the prioritized set of user stories, add more detailing there, add wireframes, and then add the acceptance criteria, the given when then scenarios, and then we work with the users to try and understand what their needs are, the opportunities, and then perhaps even try and have some kind of prototype or a demonstration session, the showcase sessions with the customers and the users. We try and get the feedback from them. It's going to be, as you notice, it's more or less like a two-way communication, or even a multi-way communication amongst these rest of the stakeholders as well. It's not just one way where we're trying to draw the inputs from them, but we're also trying to give something back to them. So it's going to be a multi-pronged strategy of engagement with each of these stakeholders. And again, with the other stakeholders, we talked about different types of stakeholders, right? We talked about the external stakeholders, suppliers, the regulators, competitors, people who provide us the inputs and the insights. It could be the kind of foresters, or some of these kind of analyst organizations who give us the reports, right? So all of those foresters kind of reporting organizations and forecasting organizations, all of those are going to be the external stakeholders, and how we can try and pitch ourselves there is what is important. And that's what we pretty much do with the elicitation. So it's about not just understanding what they tell us that this is what we do, but we're trying to unearth and explore and discover a lot of things which are not said and which are not told. So what do we do in terms of this preparation for elicitation activity? So if you look at the input-output diagram for this specific activity within the knowledge area, then you've got, again, as we understood, the business needs and stakeholder engagement approach would be the key input for this one. And then we would actually carry out the preparation of the elicitation, which is the main task. And then as part of this, we would need to come up with a business analysis approach. And then we also have to identify the existing information that we already have as part of the BA approach and the BA methodology. What are the kind of methodology that we have? What is the as-is situation? What are the resources that we have currently deployed? And then what are the deliverables, the artifacts, and pretty much everything that we have out there? And what are the business objectives as an overall impetus for giving the steam to this initiative, whether it is a program, project, or anything, right? And then the potential value, what is the value proposition that we have? Is it unique enough? Is it making sense for us to create a kind of an MVP, the minimum viable product, to take to the customer? So that's something which we can try and identify at this stage. And then what are the tasks that use this output? So we've got several tasks, like conduct elicitation, which is the one that is following this activity. So essentially, whatever you try and create for this preparation activity would be consumed as an input into the next subsequent activity of conducting of the elicitation and confirming the, which is how it flows through. So in terms of the purpose for the elicitation, so you know that the reason why we would like to have a preparation and a planning is so that we understand what are all the resources, whether it is soft resources or harder resources, people, technologies, hardware, infrastructure, setup, and everything else, the schedules. We've got pretty much everything in place. That's the whole idea why we would like to do the preparation for this elicitation. And what does that mean in terms of getting these resources organized? It means that we need to define the scope of the elicitation technique, whether it is a workshop. We're going to discuss what are the elicitation techniques in the next few slides, but whatever it could be, whether it is a workshop, interview, or a prototype or demo, whatever it could be, end of the day, we need to actually have a clear definition of scope of that, what is going to cover and what's going to address, and what it is not going to address. So all of those, perhaps the perimeter of what you're going to define. And then we also need to select the appropriate technique. Again, I'm going to give you the specific aspects of each of those in the next few slides, very detailed. You'll get an idea how to select which technique for doing what kind of activity. And then we would gather the supporting material, the resources required for us to carry out the elicitation. Then we'll have a plan in terms of when the people are available to conduct either the interviews or the workshops or whatever. So that's the essential set of tasks that you would carry out within this activity. And when you talk about the scope for the elicitation technique, whatever the technique could be, you need to identify what is it that you're trying to do as part of that. Are you trying to have a one-on-one session? Are you trying to actually try and discover a lot of different ideas and concepts? And in which case you're going to get all the people involved in a room. Do we have the schedules? Do we have their availability in place? What are the roles going to be? Are they all going to have the same role, the multiple roles? Do we have a role play kind of scenario? We can try and discuss all of these. We can try and think through all of these and then come up with a plan for how we're going to prepare for this. So it's pretty much like if you've got an interview or something like that, or a meeting with your client, you are going to really prepare yourself for all the things, right? Like the way you actually look at the meeting date, time, place. Do we have the presentation? If the client asks you some questions, are we all prepared with the answer? So those kind of things are all kind of, what is important. That sense of preparation and that level of preparation is what you would typically need, even if you're trying to define your own elicitation within the organization inside. And then you would need to gather the supporting material resources, as I just mentioned. It could be the presentation, it could be the supporting material, it could be the documents that can, it can be the paperwork that is required for you to give out as part of the exercise. So all of these, or perhaps if it is something like a virtual or online thing, you can actually set up a wiki, or you can do a Confluence page, where in fact there is a new concept that is coming up now called Jamboard, which in Google you can do a Jamboard, which basically is like a whiteboard that you can try and as you conduct the meeting, as you conduct a workshop or an interview, you can note down the points, the key insights and key discussion points, or some of the minutes of the meeting, for example. All of those, some ideas that you gather from the meetings, workshops, interviews, you can actually take those online as you conduct those. So it's like a virtual notepad that you're writing on, so people can actually contribute automatically to that. So it's a collaborative exercise. So it's something which you can use. I mean, that's another example, not just a wiki page, but also a Jamboard, as it is called, jamming. People jam and create a Jamboard, like a whiteboard, where they can draw, they can write ideas, they can capture the points discussed and things like that. So that's another way of capturing something during the, and then we move on to the selection of the appropriate technique. Once you've got that in place, obviously the next step is to select which technique you're going to adapt to do the elicitation. There's so many different techniques. They're close to about 15 or 20 that I know of, but there may be more. So you need to understand what is it that you would need to first do. What are the objectives of this elicitation exercise? How much time do you have? What type of budgets do you have? Do you have the people available? Do you have any softwares that you are in need of? Do you need any other tools? All these things would come into picture when you're trying to decide which specific technique you're going to adopt. And it could also mean that when you try and do the scheduling, you would need to identify the roles of the participants, as we just discussed. You also need to look at their availability. For example, if you're trying to put together a workshop, then you need 10 people in the room at the same time, which means that there may be a lot of conflicts of their availability, because all of their, might be in middle management. If you're conducting an interview, you need to understand whether the person is available in that specific time slot, because usually interviews are done with the senior management people, the CXOs. They're very busy. So it's all about how you get the right set of people with the right availability in the right time, in the right place. So that's the whole idea. And then the logistics involve obviously having a meeting room or a conference room, having the bridge to call in, having this, as we just discussed, some kind of a Jamboard or some kind of a virtual collaborative tool where you can share the screen, where you can actually have a video conference, for example, and they can see you, you can see them talk, and then perhaps you can do a recording of that session for taking the notes for future consumption. All of these things are important. And as we just discussed, how are you going to establish the communication channel? Is it a video conference? Is it an audio conference? Is it going to be a physical meeting one-on-one, or is it going to be a many to one, many people in the same room? How are we going to arrange the logistics? What about the coffees, the teas, any biscuits and snacks? All of those need to be discussed in advance. And then once you've identified all of these things, obviously the important thing is that you would let them know. You say that this is the schedule I've got, and there's a time, this is the agenda. So most often what is important is, I have got this so many times, where the stakeholders that I was trying to interview, they were not clear. They were saying, do you want me to prepare anything ahead of the interview? Do you want me to show something and all that? So you should actually set the expectations clear when you send out the meeting invite, saying that, well, this is the purpose of this interview or the workshop. These are the main points that we're going to discuss in the agenda. And these are the expectation, whether you would like them to be prepared for the interview or not, or whether they need to bring something for the workshop beforehand so that they're prepared well enough. Usually they don't need any preparation. That's the whole idea for these kind of things, because it's something that you're discussing that they do day in and day out. That is part of their day job. So it's something that should come through automatically.
Did you just say that some of the stakeholders you're dealing with, they didn't understand fully, or what was
they would have, exactly, they would have some questions when you send out the email, because you don't send it out. So sometimes I had this experience where it was sent by the person who is dealing with all this from the client's organization, and they're not usually comfortable with these kind of situations where they know what's to be sent or not. So they just say that, can I have this 1 hour of your time? Pardha would like to have a discussion with you. So these guys are clueless as to what is this discussion about. Do they need any preparation? Do they need to bring in anything? Can they do it on their workplace, in the desk, near the desk, or should it be out, in a different meeting room? All of these things come into their mind. So in fact, I actually have learned it the hard way after about a few experiences instance, and then I started sending out a kind of a sample mail to these people, to the person who is scheduling these within the organization, because I'm always like, obviously it's like a consultant that we are being looked at, so we're being brought in. So I would send out a mail saying that, please send this mail out to the all the participants. So that mail actually talks about what is the objective of this, why we're doing this, what are the expectations, do they need any preparation or not, can it be done outside their office, or is it within their workplace, do they need to show anything, any documents, anything in terms of supporting their views when they express whatever they express. And obviously I would say that I would also need to record their permission to record. So I'll say that, with your explicit permission, if you're okay, I would like to record this session. Mostly it is audio recording. I used to actually carry the Sony recorder, a very small, sleek one before. I mean, that was about 8 years ago, 10 years ago. After that, I started recording that. Nowadays, you've got mobile phones where you can just do the voice memos. So I'll record it. I'll say that, I just wanted to use this. I want to get your permission to record the session, if that's okay with you, so that this is only for the purpose of making sure that I don't miss out anything. Because the whole idea is, whenever I'm doing the interviews, I've seen a lot of people where they try and take the notes as well as asking question, and that's almost a no-no, because you're not in the flow of that
Yeah.
when you're trying to take notes and also trying to understand, listen, and form the next question or whatever follow-up question. So my practice is usually I've got one person from the client's organization who's actually taking the notes, and I would be like conducting this interview. So I won't take any notes. Maybe I'll just say like one keyword, 1 point, 2 points, if it is important to follow up question or thing. But otherwise, I've got the person taking notes. In fact, we went to this all around the world tour from all the way from US, UK, China, and India. So this person was, we were going and meeting the clients and people in the universities and the large organizations, trying to understand how they access the information, all that stuff. So I was doing these interviews with these people. So the person from the client's organization, initially he didn't buy into this. He said, how is this helpful for us and all that. So once I had just one interview with the UCL person, he wrote no less than 23 pages with his notes, like it was a proper ruled note. And he just came there to see what I'm going to do, how I'm going to conduct this. So in that first session, it lasted just about 55 minutes with the interview with the person. And the person from the client's organization was so zapped that he was like ecstatic. He said, in the last 18 years of my service, I've never seen or hear so many insights coming in from one person talking about the challenges, the problems, the opportunities, and all the good things and bad things they could say about our products, our journals, our magazines, and our content, all in just 55 minutes. And he, as a proof, he said, you know what, I have written every point. I don't want to miss anything. And he actually showed that. He wrote 23 pages just in the 55 minutes of interview. And I made him write every single interview. And not that I made him write, but he made it in practice because he's of that kind of a person. So he came around with, for every interview on all the places that I went through. So he was actually next to me. He was obviously not asking. Perhaps I'll just give about 2-3 minutes or 5 minutes later at the end of the session to say, okay, Graham, I'm done. Would you like to ask anything specifically? Then he would ask maybe 1 or 2 questions. But he would turn up with about no less than 20-25 pages worth of his handwriting and notes that he would take. And later he would actually scan all of that and he would send it over to me every time. And I used to go through that. So that's my practice. That's how I typically do. If possible, I would have what technically we call them as scribes. The scribe would write the notes and take the points and findings and all that stuff as we do the interview. And we moderate, as in the interviewer would not be a scribe. If you have interviewer playing the role of a scribe, it gets messy. I'll talk about all of these in those techniques as and when we come through that. So that's very, very important to note that as well. And it might, as we say that, for example, we can come across some situations where stakeholders, if you talk to technology person, the CTO and the CIOs, they've got one version of requirements and one version of what the project should deliver. Vis-a-vis, if you talk to the sales guys or the business guys, they've got a completely different version of that. It can potentially happen. In fact, it happened to me so many times because each of these people, business, technology, customers, operations, infrastructure, all of these are different perspectives. Each of the stakeholders comes with their own background, their own context, their own view of how they're. So that's why it is called siloed view, isn't it? So you actually have got that blinkered view of how you look at things, which may not be the case with other person. So it's important as BA that we need to kind of cut across these different perspectives, and we should be able to collect the views, the opinions, the preferences, expectations, goals, and stuff like that from across these different stakeholders. And then when there's a conflict, so when you try and analyze these after the workshops or the interviews, that's when you find, oh by the way, Simon says something about this project, whereas Sarah has got a completely different view. So there's a strong conflicting view. So you need to identify that. And then there are some strong themes emerging from everyone. So if 5 people out of 7 says, I want this to be delivering this, that means it's a very strong theme. So you should actually kind of prioritize it. And if one thing comes across as very confusing, differentiated view from across a different stakeholder, that means it needs to be probed further. You need to understand why that has caused so much of discord amongst the stakeholders. So you might want to actually either conduct a workshop, or in the next set of another elicitation activity, you might want to clear that out. So that's very important. It did happen to me so many times. It's not unusual when you try and do the interviews, especially the stakeholder interviews to start with. And when you come across those, as I mentioned, it's not important that you just leave it at that. What is more important is you identify those strong themes, the strong areas of concurrence and agreement, and then you also need to identify what areas have got the conflicting views, and then try and bring them to the surface, and then ask them why they think that way. And then perhaps we can, after a few discussions in a workshop, for example, you just raise this point. Hey, okay, by the way, this point 3, we've got some differing views on this. So perhaps can we just have a quick discussion on that, so that we can take a decision whether it's in or out, right? So something like that we do in the workshop, and it gets clarified there. And also the important thing is, as I mentioned the other day, it's about describing the current state, which is the as is, and the future state. Sometimes people are so confused, and also they're confused in terms of even what we call as solutionizing things. So when you try and do the elicitation, what you need to understand, what you need to drive through is basically the problem space and the problem definition, problem statement. It's important that you understand the needs, the opportunities, the challenges, the constraints, the threats, the risks, all of these things, these kind of things, not the solutions. I mean, if the stakeholders, the senior stakeholders start talking and giving solutions, that means that it's bound to be a failure, because we have not, first of all, not identified what the problem is. We have not prioritized it. We have not specified it. We're not communicated. Rather, we jump straight into the solution, and that's bound to fail. So you need to be very clear about not solutionizing the situation. We should try and have a clear definition of the problem. They have almost always got this problem. I want like this, I want this to be done, blah, blah, blah. They come up with that, but you need to separate the wheat from the chaff. And we should say that, okay, can we get back to this? Can you please tell me what you think about this? What are challenges and all that stuff? So you need to steer the conversation in a way that would help you to elicit, to identify, to come up with problems, opportunities, needs, needs, and the constraints and things, and then that would help you to lead into the solution.